thank you so much for being with me today. Can you tell me a little bit what you do as being the co-founder and the coordinator of the NJ Food Democracy Collaborative?
Hi, Morgan. It's a pleasure to be talking with you tonight. Thanks for asking me to chat. A bunch of different things. So I facilitate a statewide network of people, individuals, and organizations from a really wide range of different economic sectors and parts of the food system and different interests and concerns, all sort of united around several shared beliefs, or a vision. Or maybe folks are more united and more coalesced around a set of concerns that they'd like to see ameliorated, right? Like, so obviously there's like what I call like traditional food insecurity issues that definitely brings people to the table, around making sure that there's that everybody, regardless of where they live or how much money they make, whatever their situation is, that everybody has access to enough healthy food where they live, and that there aren't unnecessary burdens and barriers to getting folks all across the state, no matter what their circumstances are, like getting them access to healthy food. At the state level, essentially what we do is we look at the issue of food insecurity from a more longer term perspective and a more holistic perspective. So food insecurity, for most folks involved in the Food Democracy Collaborative, I think would agree that we don't just look at food security as like the emergency food sector, like people going to the food pantry and getting their needs met for maybe a couple days or a week. So we think of it more of like a hand up, not a handout. And obviously there are emergency food needs that need to be addressed, but I like to just think of it as like the growing need for people to go to food pantries and food banks are a symptom of a very broken and problematic food system. Yeah. And at the same time, we need to be acknowledging that true food security comes from having a really strong agricultural sector. And so we think of farm viability, New Jersey farmer viability, as being absolutely critical for food security in New Jersey. I'm going to go let my dog in.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about the NJ Roadmap for Food System Resilience. Okay. And the purpose of this document was a couple of main reasons. So the goal is really to paint a vision of a food system that is equitable and inclusive and resilient. And what does that look like in real terms? And what are some of the things that we could do to help bring that up? It also was a way for us to sort of weave together some of the reports that had come out in the last year or so before we put out our report, and sort of connect them all together. So one of the first things that we advocate for is the way that folks talk about food insecurity and food system issues in general. And so we advocate for adopting like a more holistic discourse. So adopting like a holistic food system perspective. So when we're thinking about addressing problems like food insecurity, for example, that we're thinking about them as a systemic issue, and what does it look like to address that with the entire food system in mind. And so from production to disposal, like how can we improve the process so that it's more equitable and more people are able to access the things that they need. And then we advocate for legislation and policies that help bring more food from our local farms like into communities, into a way to in a sense that like everybody can access food from local farms. So there are many different ways to do that. And one of the ways that we advocate for is to try to get more farmers markets and food hubs and farm stands to accept SNAP benefits.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. My next question is, what made you decide to be the co-founder of...
I had just moved from California, where I was working doing SNAP outreach and SNAP education for a healthcare system, and I also worked for on the weekends I worked for our local farmers market. I was frustrated when I found that not only was there no public available information to find out where you could use your SNAP benefits for farms in New Jersey or farmers markets, but then after I moved here and I started my own farm and I wanted to become authorized to accept SNAP, I was even more frustrated that there was no way for potential customers of mine to find out that, I was one of the farmers that accepted SNAP. So that got me digging into things and learning more about New Jersey's food system and food policy here, and looking for answers from different organizations and not finding any organizations that were looking into and advocating for the issues that I saw and I heard from friends and colleagues of mine that they were also concerned about. That got me digging into things and learning more about New Jersey's food system and food policy here, and looking for answers from different organizations and not finding any organizations that were looking into and advocating for the issues that I saw and I heard from friends and colleagues of mine that they were also concerned about. So it was a point of conversation with a few other colleagues, realizing that if there isn't an organization that's really looking at these issues at a policy level, maybe we need to start one. And in terms of the vision, I would like to see us grow to a point where we have paid staff and where we're putting on events, 2 or 3 times a year around like really elevating certain issues that are not getting enough. And then I guess the number one thing is I'd like to see us have more presence in the state legislature. I'd also like to see us to have more regular engagement with folks from like the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Human Services, Department of Health. But in terms of like where I'd like, so that's from the organizational perspective, but where I'd like to see the New Jersey's food system go in the next 5-10 years is really to focus on the viability of our farmers simultaneously while we're addressing food security. So I want those two things to be discussed and addressed as part and parcel of the same problem, because they are. So as we're thinking about how do we get food to people, how do we get more people access to fresh fruits and vegetables, having the farmer's perspective and what's good for farmers held in the same high regard as we hold the need to address the need to make sure that everybody has enough nutritious food to eat. So I'd like to see policies that really have that understanding and that perspective at their core and their foundation.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing this with me. I actually did not know of the NJ Food Democracy collaboration until you told me about it. So it's definitely like something really interesting that I didn't know about, and it definitely would have helped as like a college student to know about this. So just my last and final question, where do people normally find out about collaboration or this program?
So that's a good question. I think it's mostly word of mouth that folks will learn about the work that we're doing, and they'll want to be part of one of our work groups, or they'll want to come to one of our events and learn more. So for the most part, it's been, I'd say the two biggest ways are word of mouth, and then also we have social media. Yeah. We're on Instagram, so we've been trying to increase our outreach that way.